Okay, everyone, welcome to yet another Final Fantasy / JRPG discussion. And today I'm joined by a very, very, very special guest whose channel has greatly influenced me as a creator and as a Final Fantasy fan. I've been wanting to have this guest for so long. I have Darryl here with me from Final Fantasy Union. Say hello.
Ahoy, everyone. Thank you for the kind words, Ryan.
No, thank you. I think if you guys are familiar with me, then you're probably definitely familiar with him and Final Fantasy Union. But you can go ahead and give those for the small number of people who are somehow out of the loop in the Final Fantasy community, because I'm pretty sure if they actively watch Final Fantasy YouTube content, they have seen your stuff before. But give them a rundown of what you and Lauren do on your channel.
Sure. So so we are Final Fantasy Union. I say we, but I run the channel with my wife. She's a bit under weather at the moment, so it's just me, unfortunately. But so we run the channel together. We've been doing the YouTube for about 4 years, but we've been running Final Fantasy Union for about a decade now, and we actually have a podcast as well. It's been running for about 12 years. That was set up on as a hype podcast for Final Fantasy 13, which is so old, so old. We typically do kind of analytical studies of the franchise, a lot of backstory. We've done origin series where we basically run through each of the characters or the main characters in the franchise and really try and put a lot more emphasis on the motivations behind their actions and try and, I guess, massage out what the creators were trying to infer, especially with the older stories. And it's one of the things that was so cool about the remake, because in the build-up, Nojima had said that Final Fantasy VII, because there was no voice acting and because they were quite limited, you can interpret the actions of the characters and what they say in so many different ways. And so we try and come to a logical conclusion with characters, and obviously with the more modern ones it's a bit easier. But we also do evolutionary studies where we take a really small concept in Final Fantasy and see how that has changed over time. They end up being massively crazy videos that are very consuming, but they're also really, really cool. For example, in our recent one about Bahamut, one of the interesting traits about Bahamut is that he's often found in a cave.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Often found in a cave or at the top of a mountain.
That's interesting.
And if he's at the top of a mountain, he's generally evil in that game for whatever reason.
Wow, that's
he does some kind of
fascinating
antagonistic action.
Right. Wow.
That's kind of what we do, and we do kind of opinion pieces. So we've been looking into some of the cancelled games, or not cancelled, but prospective games. We did one about Final Fantasy X-0 and why that's probably never going to be made ever, as long as Toriyama's at the company. And just just stuff that we basically wanted the channel to be a celebration of the franchise, and so it's not heavily opinion led. It's more kind of based on actuals and facts and stuff, and we don't try and put our opinions across too much. That's what we do on our podcast, and sometimes people get upset by that.
Yeah,
usually
you're telling me. Yeah.
Usually we're okay.
All right. So what's your history with Final Fantasy? What's your first game?
My history is I mean, everyone's history with the franchise is obviously very unique. My history is I don't know if anyone else would have the same experience as me, and it's a bit weird. But piracy was my friend in a way, because the only reason I got into Final Fantasy was because my next door neighbor, his older sister was an air hostess, and she used to go to Asia a lot. And when she was in Malaysia, she picked up a bootlegged copy of Final Fantasy VII on the PC. And when she brought it back, I had literally no clue what this game was. I was a big PC gamer, so I was constantly playing games like Command and Conquer, GTA, like just like Carmageddon, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, like all these like not RPGs at all remotely. And then he had this game and I was playing it with him. I didn't even get to play. I just watched him and I just got really absorbed into it. And then he let me borrow it, but I could only have one disc at a time. And my PC, I used to try and mod my PC all the time, upgrading the components. And just before I got it, I happened to have a hardware conflict. I put in a new processor and it just didn't agree with like my graphics card or something in my computer. So and it only happened with Final Fantasy VII. Whenever I played Final Fantasy VII, the game would crash at like just random moments. So I could get through like 3/4 of the opening bombing mission, but there's save points. If you don't get to the next save point, you're kind of screwed.
Right.
And like the game would just crash, and I'd be like, okay, well I've got to do that again. But for some reason, I just loved the game so much that I just did not care. I just carried on persevering because I was like, you know what? This time, maybe I'll get a little bit further before it crashes, and then I'll be okay. Also, for some reason, like crazy younger Darryl, I figured out that it was a hardware conflict, and I could have used the worst of processors to play the game, but I just refused because for like a period of time it was okay. Right. It was okay. I got up to Hojo, right? Beat Hojo, and then I didn't have disc 3, and my next door neighbor was out. So, and this is even worse.
Yeah.
So I got to like the change disc screen.
Yeah.
And I just had to wait until my neighbor came back. I didn't know when it was going to be. I thought it was a couple of hours. I turned the monitor off to save some power. My dad turned the PC off because he thought that he was trying to turn it on. So then I had to go back to my previous save, and like beating Hojo was hard for me at that time. It was a real accomplishment to get through it. And then the game kept crashing every single time I beat Hojo. It would be in the cutscene underneath just before the disc changed, and I just never could get to it again. And I was like, oh, this is just so frustrating. But I made it through, and then I got the Final Fantasy VIII PlayStation magazine, which was really cool, but I didn't really follow it that much. I had no idea when the game was coming out, and then my friend came around and was like, Final Fantasy VIII just came out. Got on my bike straight down to the store, got the special edition back home, played that game religiously, and then that's kind of how I got into it. And then like how I got into all of this is it's like a massive long winding story as well. Like I really wanted to be a composer, but I didn't know it. But when I was playing Final Fantasy VIII, I didn't really pay attention too much to video game music until that point. But playing Final Fantasy VIII, the music just did something in me. I don't know why.
The music is incredible in that game.
Yeah, like I had a keyboard. Like I used to teach myself. I taught myself how to play keyboard and stuff, but I wasn't too serious about it. And then when I had the landing, I was like, I need to figure out how to play this. But it was like before the internet in the way it is now, so you couldn't just like find a version of it you could listen to. So I just had to sit on the beach with the game just looping the track round, and every single time it looped round, playing by ear, I was able to figure out a little bit more of the piece. And so I taught myself how to play the landing, and then I actually used it as a school composition project. Because I was like, no one in my school, none of my music teachers are going to know what the hell this is or who wrote this. And I actually used some of Uematsu's work for my GCSE in music, and my teacher was just like, who is this? Like, who's this composer? Like, random Japanese guy? It's like, it sounds okay. Like, it's decent enough level. Okay, sure, knock yourself out. So, like, I did Ami on the piano for my GCSE, and then I did Melodies of Life with like a grand piano, and I had someone playing the flute and someone playing like violin and stuff as well, which is pretty cool. But I like joined a Final Fantasy music community. So there was this website called Final Fantasy Music Online, because I wanted to get some feedback on some compositions I was doing. And I just thought, well, I'm kind of like this franchise. I'll join up here and ask people for some feedback. And they gave me some feedback, which is nice. and I just stuck around. And then from there, I just kind of weaseled my way into all these different communities. So I was part of, we set up a website called AWFF, or World Final Fantasy, which was all about Final Fantasy concept art. I was part of AdventChildren.net, Final Fantasy Extreme, FF Insider, like all these really old school websites.
That sounds like an old school website, Final Fantasy Extreme. That sounds like...
actually just, I think it's just relaunched as well, weirdly enough.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
I feel it's just relaunched.
Yeah, that sounds like every like fandom website back in like the mid 2000s. Something
there
something
so many.
extreme, yeah.
FF something, which is why ours is Final Fantasy Union, because it was still kind of that era where everything had to have that connection. It was like all those old websites are FF something. Like there's even like FF Citadel, FF Compendium, there's FF Spirit. Like there's FF Shrine, which obviously became the music download place. Everything FF something. You just had to have FF something. FF Online obviously was like the massive big one for years, and that was such a cool website back when that was big in like the early 2000s. It looked so official, it was amazing. But yeah, that's my story. It's very long-winded.
Wow. Oh,
very very.
No,
long-winded.
it's actually very incredible. For those who actually don't know, a brief rundown of my story, because I don't think I've ever even told my channel, because I've talked about some of the stuff, like how I dropped out of college, for example, and then that led me to considering different career options and things like that, and then that's how I started YouTube. But even before that, I think the segment that people know but they don't really connect to how it led me to YouTube, or how I played a big role in it, was being a cosplayer and being in like the Final Fantasy cosplay community. And that was actually like the greatest influence for me too when I started the channel, because the first thing that I wanted to do when I got to conventions was I wanted to meet people who had like-minded interests, and I met so many other Final Fantasy fans there, and they convinced me to cosplay. Then I started doing Final Fantasy cosplays. I cosplayed as Noctis, and that's actually where the name the Night Sky Prince comes from. It's because my first Final Fantasy cosplay was Noctis. And that's why I still...
That nickname you came up with yourself, or did other people bestow it upon you?
So, interestingly, I came up with it myself, because it sort of is a pun on Noctis's name, because Light of the Night Sky. And so...
The very literal name, that is Noctis Lucis Caelum.
Mm-hmm. And that's also why... I don't think too many people know this, but if you watch my intro really slowly, you see something like shoot across. That is the engine sword that like shoots across like really fast and creates the underline. And that's that's how I became the Night Sky Prince. It was just I wasn't too concerned with naming conventions at the time. I just wanted something that sounded cool, and that's that's what I went with. Young. I want to say I was 25 when I started channel, 29 now. Actually, no, I was about to turn 25. I was 24 at the time. So, but yeah, so let's get into what's happening right now. Final Fantasy XVI, right? Let's start with, what are your general impressions of this game so far? Like, how are you feeling about it?
I'm feeling pretty excited at the moment. We've done a lot of lore, diving into tactics a lot, really, and the connections there are getting me quite excited about what it could become. Obviously, my fear is that it could go more like 12, and I hope that's not going to be the case, because I think tactics is a much stronger story and much more well developed. And from what I'm seeing of it and what they released from the recent website, there's a lot of potential there for it to be a very mature story. Obviously, we've seen the blood and stuff already, so there is that association. But I feel as though there could be a story that is very political, but also very character driven. And I feel as though that's maybe what 12 lacked a bit. It was very political. We didn't really have the character development in the same way that the tactics did. And if Yoshida and Takai are able to blend the good parts of that Matsuno influence into their own stuff, and obviously they blend in what they've learned from 14, then that could be really powerful.
Completely agree. I'm playing Final Fantasy 14. Do you or Lauren play Final Fantasy 14, by the way?
We did. But then we had children, and they did not allow us to do the YouTube channel and everything else while playing that. So it was hard. We were doing like this weird thing where because we hadn't played it, but we were like really prominent Final Fantasy people. It was like this weird thing where people just are really surprised that we don't play it. Because it is such a synonymous experience now. Tell what, I did play Final Fantasy XIV when it first came out, version 1.0, right?
Same actually, yeah.
And because I had it for review, and I played it with two other reviewers on my website, and because I played Final Fantasy 11 a boatload. I had like almost 100 days of playtime on Final Fantasy 11. So Final Fantasy 14 for me wasn't that bad. As everyone else was like absolutely panning it, saying it was the worst game ever made, worst MMO ever. Everyone was giving like 2s, 3s, 4s out of 10. I was like, I can see the value in what they're trying to. I can understand it, because they made the mistake of just trying to iterate on what they did, as opposed to saying, how has the rest of the MMO landscape changed in the last like 4 or 5 years?
Exactly.
So they got left a little bit behind, but I hadn't played any other MMO. So for me, 14 was like, there was some pretty cool systems. Like the fatigue system was the worst. I'll say that. It was the worst.
Couldn't jump.
But yeah, like, and the map. Why was there no map?
Yeah.
I seem to remember there being no map or like no waypoints on the map or something stupid like that.
And there was a lot of like weird like copy and paste stuff with assets. So they would have like, I don't know how to explain it, but I remember the maps being like, it would almost be like they would design like one part of the map and then they'd copy and paste it like over here, and like all they'd maybe do is like rotate it slightly different and then connect them together, and that was the map.
They they did large portions of the game, but like just didn't flesh them out. Like I remember for one point we just went, because the world map was huge, like in the original, but like there was nothing there. You could like go to all these other zones, but there was no point because there was nothing to do. There was like no enemies there. It was just you walking around greenery that looked nice. But like I remember because Ishgard like is one of the main, like the central city, right? Kind of like Juno is in 11. I feel like you could walk to the area, because I don't think it was in the original version, but you could walk to the point where Ishgard was supposed to be.
Yeah, you could
kind of see it. But like it was a really long trek to get there, which obviously is very Final Fantasy 11 like, where you just have to walk for flipping ages to get anywhere. But like, yeah, I didn't stick with it when everything started going down. Actually, the reason why I stopped playing Final Fantasy 11 is because my PC caught on fire when I was playing it.
How did your PC catch on fire?
Apparently it wasn't good enough to spec to manage it or something. I was playing it for about a month, and then I remember I was actually playing 14, I think, while I was on because Lauren lived back in the States when that was happening. And there was like smoke kind of, I was like, I kind of smell something. And then, like smoke just started pluming at the back of my computer. And I think my PSU just like gave up the ghost or something. And so I didn't play after that.
Oh my God.
That was it for me. I was like, okay, I'm going to move on to other things now.
Oh my God. Okay. That's, yeah, that's, I mean,
that's extreme. I have a very love-hate relationship with the franchise, as you can tell. Like, my technical side of my hardware has issues with the franchise. Sorry, I should say. Yeah, it creates experiences.
Yeah, you're like, I love that game growing up, and then my console blew up, and then I couldn't play it anymore. I'm like, whoa, okay, dark. Like most people, it's just like, oh, my save game corrupts. Yours is like, no. My PC caught on fire. Yeah. But yeah, I've been catching up with Final Fantasy XIV right now, and I'm right past Heavensward, the actual 3.0, and like I'm on like 3.2, like heading into 3.3 right now. And just Heavensward alone has instilled a lot of faith in me for what this team could do. It's such a compelling story. And you can tell that the team got so much more budget whenever they got to Heavensward 2. Because A Realm Reborn,
it was just basically this, that let's play it completely safe. let's just make sure that it's okay, it's serviceable, it does what it needs to do, and then we can do what we want to do.
Right. We need to make a functional game. was basically their goal with A Realm Reborn. And
just take all the parts of the other games that are on the market, just integrate them in, put in a few smatterings of Final Fantasy here and there, all good.
Yeah, and A Realm Reborn is very much like that too. Like when you play it, it's not until you get to Heavensward that's when you see like, oh, okay, this is what this team actually wants to do, and then it feels very good. And then that's also when your skills and your abilities and stuff are expanded enough where combat starts to feel like it has a lot more depth to it as well. And it's just a very good point to be at, and it's given me a lot of like hope for Final Fantasy XVI as well, because I know the guy who's directing it, he also played a big creative role on Heavensward as well.
Yep, he was part of the revival team. Yeah,
which is awesome. So, which actually,
but he also directed The Last Remnant though, which is another game which is, I can see the positives to it, but there were some dubious decisions made in that game as well. But I don't necessarily they were by him. The battle system was it was good, but it had its bad traits, because I seem to remember, I don't know if they changed it, but it was one of those systems where it's like, in 8 where like if you get stronger, the enemies get stronger.
Yeah.
In The Last Remnant, they did it so it was quite extreme. So like if you leveled up to basically the game could be almost impossible to beat if you ground, like, which is like the complete antithesis of what a JRPG is.
Yeah.
You grind, you get better, the game gets easier. Whereas they were like, oh, you did too much grinding there. No.
Yeah. Basically punishing the player for playing or enjoying the game too much, really. Which is
it could just be that I completely didn't understand the game either. But that was the first game I ever reviewed as well for a publication, and it was an interesting one to do as a review.
Yeah, and I don't think it's only you who felt that way regarding that game, because it's actually a very common criticism that I see of it. I haven't played.
It had a good story though. Like I really enjoyed it. I liked like the different characters they employed, and again I liked the different regions and stuff. And again, that does make me quite interested in to see what Takai's going to do, because he has this well-rounded experience where it's kind of like Yoshida as well. Like he worked on like loads. Like he worked on a big RPG franchise before he joined Square. I can't remember, was it Namco? Maybe he worked at, but no, Konami must have been, because he worked on Bomberman. But then he did Dragon Quest, and like so he came in kind of with fresh eyes, but he also was very, very much a Final Fantasy person because of like tactics and his love for Matsuno. But like Takai, he's worked on the Saga franchise, worked on the Mana franchise, he's worked on the Final Fantasy franchise as well, like bits. So he probably has like these things that he really wants to do, but also can leverage these other things he's learned along the way, because he hasn't been so restricted. Because there's other franchises that have a bit more creative license because they don't have the same massive spotlight glaring down on them.
Exactly. So this actually leads me into my next question, which I feel like from someone who's followed the development of Final Fantasy XV as closely as I have, what lessons do you want to see Final Fantasy XVI learn from FF15?
I think the biggest lesson I want them to learn is to keep a degree of consistency, because I think that's been my biggest bugbear about Final Fantasy probably since like after 10, where every single game has had a different vision, almost in its entirety. And like, Final Fantasy 1 through 10, they changed things around. Like obviously the story was different every single time, but there was a lot of commonality. Like a lot of them had similar battle systems, similar mechanics. There were lots of different tropes that kind of got carried through as well. So even though lots of things were different, they were still quite similar. And like, 10 changed back to a turn-based battle system, but it didn't really matter that much because it wasn't too different. But when they started going on like, 12, 13, 15, obviously the MMOs as well, all very different story in terms of their delivery, all completely different gameplay systems, with not really too much relationship between them, because they were all done by completely different people. Like I remember with some of the guys as well, like the Final Fantasy 13, for example, they didn't even have a complete battle system until 6 months, I think, before the game shipped or something crazy. They just kept changing things around. They weren't really too sure what to do. And it was Sushida, I think it was. He when he worked on 10, because he did 10 as well, he was like, I really want to be faithful to what came before. And then we're just like, nah, I can't be bothered with that. I'll just come and run new thing and just kind of pull in bits and stuff. And then I think that's the thing I would really want to see, just like a degree of consistency, because I think it's hard for people that come into the franchise and then, like, say you came in with 12 or you came in with 13 or 15 or even the 7 remake recently. Right. And then you're like, I want to play the most recent one. And then you're like, well, I didn't really recognize this game compared to the last one. Like, this isn't kind of the franchise I signed up for. Like, so I think after they did 15, I was really hoping, like, because they decided they want to go action. Fine. I don't have a problem with that as long as they stick to their guns in that regard. I really liked the 13 combat system. I think the command synergy battle system was really good, really engaging. And it was a nice kind of throwback to the ATB system as well. Right. But with 15, they were like, nah, screw it. We're doing our own thing, active cross battle or whatever it's called, I think. Yeah. I was really hoping that with 7 Remake, they would like stick to a similar thing. They kind of did a little bit, to pull in little bits, but they did their own thing again with 7 Remake. But now, like, everyone, like, pretty much universally loves the 7 Remake combat system. Yeah. Like, if they don't take advantage of that with Final Fantasy 16, I think it would be a really big mistake. If they try and come up with their own thing again, it would just create another kind of thread, another strand of things. The only thing I've seen so far that kind of gives me any faith is that it feels as though there's going to be consistency between 14 and 16, which is at least something. Right. So, like, people that play 16 may be tempted to play 14 because they might feel there's a similar experience there, and vice versa.
I think they're going 14, for that, really. Yeah. Like a lead-in.
I don't feel as though there's going to be too much of a connection with 15 or 7 Remake, because, like, internally at Square, they just don't share either. Like, they're not in the same business division, so why care? Basically, like, what? And I feel as though that's a massive mistake. And, like, I feel as though Tabata at least tried to involve other parts of Square. I remember, like, when they were trying to work with Avalanche to try and figure out how to do the airships, because they knew they could, like, speak to the guys who did Just Cause, and, like, tried. But I feel as though, like, the Japanese side is quite insular in the way they work, which is what I know why they restructured a little bit, because they had like 12, 14 business divisions who were all basically doing their own thing. And now it's 4, but there's also subdivisions within those 4. Right. But yeah, I guess that's something I wish they'd learn, that there needs to be some degree of consistency. Like, yeah, we all know Final Fantasy reinvents itself every single time, and, like, I'm all for that. When 13 came out and there was all these reviews criticizing the linearity and, like, there's no towns and all this stuff, I was like, you know, they've got to have some degree of creative license to be able to do these things. And I don't want to dissuade them from that, but I also feel like they need to have a degree of consistency, because that's how the franchise was built in the first place. Right. Like 7 changed the game a little bit, but then they built upon what 7 established. Right. They didn't just kind of go back to doing like a 2D RPG again that was completely different. They just kind of stuck, like, this is what we're doing now. Let's just roll with that for a little bit. Yeah. And then 12 happened. They changed it. If they'd have stuck with 12 and done more games in that vein, fine. But then they got rid of Matsuno. So
I think that Final Fantasy 1 through 10, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think, like, if you look at Final Fantasy 1 through 10, there is a certain consistency to the formula there that each one has that we attribute to classic Final Fantasy. And I think there's some things that are, some of those things are narrative, some of those things were the combat system, but there was definitely a consistent formula there. And then it really started for the single player series with 12, where it started to sort of deviate from all those things. And I don't think that they necessarily need to go back to turn-based or anything in terms of like combat, for example. But what you're saying with Final Fantasy VII Remake kind of setting the bar for a good action combat in the series, and that really being hard to wean off of for anything else, I completely agree. I feel like I'm almost...
Yeah.
I feel like I may be disappointed that there's no command element to 16, because I've gotten so attached to having that command element in 7R. And in a lot of ways, when I'm playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, aside from the fact that I'm running around and swinging the Buster Sword and doing those types of things, in a lot of ways, it really doesn't feel that different from what Final Fantasy VII's combat was in the original.
They did a fantastic job of modernizing the ATB system. Like it's very subtle in the way that they did it, but like, the fact that you can't use an item until it's your turn, like it annoys people, but it also is very balanced to a degree, and it's a great homage to the roots, and I feel as though they don't have to reinvent everything every time. Like the ATB system, once Ito created it for 4, like they modified it a bit with 5 to add like the visual time bar, but it basically stayed the same from 5 through 9. They just made small tweaks here and there, little modifications around like the wider mechanics, but really it was pretty much the same system. Like you might have an extra party member, or they might allow the ATB bar to charge during a summon, like just like really small like nuances, but like people got used to it and they liked it. They made it interesting by how they adapted it to the party members. Like you get different gameplay mechanics. Like in Final Fantasy IX, everyone's got like a clear-cut job, but they didn't end 7 or 8. Like you get all these different things, and they made it fresh with the way they interpreted their own system. Like they don't have to with 16 come up with a completely brand new system. They just made one.
Yeah.
That got almost universally praised. Like save yourself some time, just adapt it slightly to whatever it is you're doing. And there's still the chance that they may be doing that, because we don't really know anything too much about the combat at this point. And if they did, that would be amazing. But from the looks of things, they're probably not going to, right? Because Suzuki's already, it's Ryoto Suzuki, right? He's the battle director.
And also the game has been in development for 4 years too. So it was in development as soon as Final Fantasy 15 was out. So.
But maybe not the battle system.
Right. Oh, that's true.
He's only been there for a year. But then also, I mean, this is the weird thing, right? So Suzuki and Terada, they both came from Capcom. Like, yeah, sure, they maybe worked on slightly different franchises, but they both came from Capcom. One of them worked on Monster Hunter, the other one worked on Dragon's Dogma. Again, you'd like to feel like there should be some sharing there.
Right, yeah. And
like,
for me,
just poaching all of their...
Yeah. For me, I think I'm very much down for that, but I think they would be at the perfect synergy if they had sort of that Devil May Cry action, but they still sort of kept the command-centric nature that 7R has.
Yeah, that like just it doesn't have to be identical. Just make it slightly more unique. Yeah, that's all it needs to be. Because I mean, like even like 14 is still quite similar to 11, but they just made it something else.
Right.
Like structurally, it's like the RTB system, but like they just modified it to the point where it's not really recognizable, but it's the same structurally. Yeah. And like if they did the same thing with 16, I think that would be really good. I mean, who knows what they're going to do with the battle system in 7 Remake Part 2? Like Terada's already talking about how he wants to like shake things up a little bit.
Yeah. They can't go with the exact same battle system the way it is for Part 2. Because imagine
they'll learn stuff.
Yeah,
it's like Mass Effect. That's always been my biggest comparison with the 7 Remake. It's Mass Effect. Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 have the same core gameplay system, but from game to game, they learned. They built on things. They adapted to what happened in that time. They made it better.
Right, and then that's what I'm looking forward to see a lot of people saying, or at least one comment saying, like in the chat, that they want 16, of course, they want party members, please. I think that party members are a guarantee, by the way. I do not think that they would actually put out a mainline FF and not have any party members. I think that would be weird. I say that. Hopefully that comment ages well.
There is that one small like 2-second clip in the trailer, right, where there's a guy in the background.
Yeah,
there's that one guy in the background giving hope.
Yeah, but
at the moment, I mean, when 13 was revealed, they only showed lightning. I'd imagine it's a similar kind of thing. They're just not ready to share the rest of the playable cast yet.
I remember when they revealed Versus, and they had only shown Noctis at the time. People also thought the same thing about that game too. So yeah, they always like start off only showing the protagonist a lot of times, and then they sort of branch out,
build out from there. Yeah, because most of the time, especially like in the era post 13 announcement, they don't really know what they're doing. They just like, here's a target render, guys. Right, now we've got to make the game. Who's the main characters? We don't really know, actually.
So actually, I think that's what excites me the most about Final Fantasy XVI. This is the first Final Fantasy since 10. That means that is since 10 to not have any technical like issues like during development that we know of so far.
Fingers crossed, right?
I got all my fingers crossed. I would cross them like this. Oh my god! But it's the first Final Fantasy since 10 to not have major technical engine issues that we know of, and it's been in development for 4 years. So even if it has had those issues, we don't have to know about it, or we won't know about it because it's been in the past. And to say that it's the first Final Fantasy since 10 to not have those types of technical issues or huge developmental issues is a massive thing, because Final Fantasy X came out 20 years ago. So we're looking at the first Final Fantasy in 20 years to not to not have any sort of technical or business issue to occur while the game's in development.
We were talking about, and Laura and I were talking about it on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, but it's the first major like numbered Final Fantasy announcement for 16 years. Yeah. Because the last, including 14, so that's still like 11 years. Because like the 15 re-announcement, if we can have that in 2013,
right?
But like, 15 was technically announced as verse 13 in 2006,
right?
And 14 was like 2009.
Yeah,
it's been so long.
Yeah,
it's really weird to think about, like, because 7 Remake's different because we all knew about it. Like, it was great and exciting, but like covering the build up, it's like, we know all the characters. We know, like, the curiosity from us was like, how are they going to do it?
Right.
Whereas now, like, we literally know nothing. Everything's a blank slate completely. So like anything that comes out of like Famitsu or whatever, like it's so much more interesting and exciting because every single thing they do is going to be something that we did not know before. And it's been such a long time since that has been the case.
Yeah, it's been a long time since we've had just something completely original and not based on anything that we've seen prior. I think that's another thing that's cool. And I just, kind of going back to that point that I was talking about all the troubled development cycles. I mean, we had like 12 switching directors. We had all the engine issues of 13 and the fact that the team was, they didn't know what they wanted to do. 14 1.0. I don't think I need to go to elaborate there. 15, again, I don't think much elaboration is needed.
That was the versus 13 problems. Then 15 had the same problems too.
Yeah.
Oh, Stella's gone. Bye, Stella.
Yeah. and then even 7R had its own issues with CyberConnect too. Which we never actually fully found out, like, entirely what happened with CyberConnect. No, and I'm sure
we probably will at some point. I mean, like, it's the whole thing. Like, every single Final Fantasy game has had some sort of drama, even going back to the first one. Because there's that quote from Uematsu, I think, where he talked about how, like, a Final Fantasy game isn't a Final Fantasy game unless there's like a massive like catastrophe during the middle of development or something crazy that happens. Like Final Fantasy X, like they made that game in like 2 years, but like after 1 year they scrapped basically the entire game and started again. Because they had a whole cast of characters, and like Tidus was supposed to be a plumber and all this weird stuff. And Tidus and Yuna was supposed to be like this like a missionary, going around curing people from the plague. If you have to have seen the concept art from that.
I've seen some of it. Yeah,
outfit. Like it's really weird. But yeah, the original story concept was that everyone dies when they're 17. But they got halfway through development, and I don't know who made the decision, but they basically just cut the entire cast apart from Titus and Yuna, and then started from scratch with pretty much everything. And it's like all these games have been through some kind of drama. It's just that now it's public when it happens.
Yeah.
So we're all aware of it. It's all going completely wrong, but it used to go completely wrong as well. We just didn't know about it.
Right. But that's also become part of Square's own bad habits too. They show stuff off so early into it being a concept, and really Versus 13 and 15 was that exact situation where they showed off a concept. Yeah. And people wanted that concept, but as that concept evolved internally, it no longer looked like the other thing. And it was
given too long to gather its own momentum in the public domain. And it just caused so much of a problem for them. And Agato was even worse, because they literally all they had was that screenshot with Class Zero, with the flag. That's the only asset they had when they announced that game. That's it.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Tabata, Nomura, and Naora who were kind of trying to figure it out for 2 years. What are we going to do with this thing that we've made? I don't know. And they couldn't figure it out. And then Nomura kept assigning Tabata to work on other things, we need to do Crisis Core, by the way. Third birthday is more important.
Yeah.
You get to do it at some point. But now, just scrap it, start again, type 0, and then you can redo Agato later down the line. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. The PSP version of that game, at least. I don't know if you ever played the original PSP version, but
I didn't have the chance to know.
The Sphere Hunter is in the chat. She says the third birthday is more important.
Yeah.
Oh, big shout out to her, by the way. Thank you for showing up. If you guys if you guys have not watched any of Susie's content, go check out the Sphere Hunter on YouTube. She's phenomenal. Actually, so I gotta hit you with the big one now, Darryl. I gotta hit you.
Yeah, I'm ready.
The big one. So recently, the Final Fantasy VII Remake Material Ultimania came out, and for a while, we thought that there wasn't really anything of significant value in there. It was talking about Cloud's hairstyle and stuff, and everyone was okay. And this was, but then we we got some more translations that came out, and what ended up happening is that we saw that, or the cutscene director more confirmed that the name of the sequence at the end with Zack was called Zack's Victory, which seems to further imply that Zack is indeed alive. And then the cutscene director further made some comments saying something along the lines of the reaction to this cutscene is realize the character's popularity and how many people want to see him have a happy ending, which is a pretty large deviation from that of the original. It's a
very large deviation.
Yeah. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, where you think they'll go, and
I ever since they announced the remake, I had an inkling that Zack was going to have a bigger role to play, just because there was a survey that came out a couple of years before, or maybe around the same time, where Zack was revealed as the most popular Final Fantasy character in Japan, and he was the most, by far the most requested character for them to put into Cydia NT. His popularity in that region is just insane. I know that they had the big survey more recently with 500,000 votes, and I think Zack was number 9 or number 10 in that. But as a guy who was basically had 10 minutes in the original game, then got a spin-off on the PSP, to have that much popularity is insane. And this is Square, they don't always play the cards in their hand to the best of their abilities, but like to discount Zack would be a huge mistake for them. And like, you know, even in our survey, we put Zack as a potential. Like, would you want to see Zack as a playable character in the next game? A decent chunk of people said yes, in preference to like Sid and Kate Sith and even Yuffie and Red 13 in some instances. Like Zack, people want him because he's the quintessential good guy. He's like the perfect hero. Like people just really liked how he was portrayed in Crisis Core. And yeah, so I always had an inkling that he would have a bigger role to play. When I saw the ending, it was an interesting experience because I was playing it for review. So I finished it like pretty early compared to most people. So I had to be quiet for quite a while about what I'd seen.
Yeah, same here. And that was hard to sit on. It was very hard to sit on.
Like, I watched it and I was thinking, like, you know, obviously you see the whispers flying around him, and I was like, you know, something's not quite right here. And obviously, as it plays out, things get a bit more apparent. And I remember, I think it's like 2:00 in the morning or something ridiculous, and I just remember watching the whole ending sequence and just going, okay, this is a choice. And then, like, when I slept on it and woke up the next morning, I was like, this is a choice. Like, this is like evil genius, like, kind of level choice.
Yeah,
because like it gives them a lot more. It gives them a lot more freedom to play with. And my theory, and I don't know if this has been like theorized by many other people, is that Zack will be a playable character in the next game, and they're gonna have it so that Cloud kind of takes a break, like, so you don't always have Cloud as playable, and Zack steps in to be, because they're going to have kind of similar play styles, I would have thought. There'll be some differences, of course, because Zack's supposed to be more developed as a soldier, and he has like slightly advanced movesets. But I feel as though, yeah, like there'll be some kind of reason that Cloud needs to go away, and then Zack will kind of step in as maybe the temporary character, or maybe you don't get to control him, maybe he's in the background or something. But I feel as though there's going to be a reason why he needs to become part of the experience and Cloud will kind of take a step back. But it's going to be weird with the next part anyway, because I feel as though with this part, Red 13 wasn't playable. You had the 4 characters, and that was like a lot, because you know, people kind of stuck to their favorites. As the cast expands, it's going to be hard to get people convinced to try the new characters out, because they're going to kind of be a bit ingrained with the older ones, unless they do change the gameplay styles up in a significant manner. And like that was one of the kind of the gripes I had with the 7 remake, was that unless you played on hard and really gave the other characters a chance, you didn't really need to. Like, most people just kind of stuck with Cloud. And that was it. Like, I didn't, when I played through the first time, I really didn't like Aerith that much. I thought that she was kind of a bit of a waste of a space, and they didn't even give you a segment at all throughout the whole experience where you're forced to learn how to use her. Like, at least with Tifa and Barrett, you had those 2 segments where you could only control them, and you had to kind of figure it out.
Aerith is good, but there's a learning curve there to learn how to use her effectively. It's
a very different type of style. Like Cloud and Tifa are like running around everywhere like crazy, super action packed. And Barrett and Aerith are kind of a bit more methodical in how you'd approach them. You need to be a bit more strategic. Still very, very powerful, but it's a very different style of gameplay. And I feel as though, like, as the franchise develops out, like, if you're going to have like the third part where you've got like all of the cast available to choose from, I feel like they're going to have to put in things to restrict people down, kind of like they did in Final Fantasy IV, where, like, you know, people keep coming in and out of the playable cast, and they don't really allow you too much choice. It's a lot. It's kind of forced upon you a lot who you can use in those given moments, and that pretty much happened throughout the entirety of the 7 remake until right at the end. But even the ending whole sequence is kind of predetermined who you get to pick, is who comes in as like the party builds out against the Whispers.
Yeah.
So I feel as though Zack's going to have a role to play. My gut is that he's going to be a playable character. I don't know how how much or how long, or whether it's going to continue as it expands. But I feel as though he's going to be there, and he's going to be playable.
So before I give my response to that, I want to tell chat, we got time for 3 questions that I can take. So if you guys want to go ahead and start pouring those in, I try to keep my eye on the good questions there. So go ahead and start pouring those in so that we can get those out of the way too. But what I was going to say is, with regards to the party members too, and this is something I haven't seen too many other people discussing, but I've been making a point on it myself, is that what's going to happen is that, well, depending on where this game is going to go up to, but I imagine that it would at least go to like Rocket Town or something like that. We would have Red 13 has to be playable now, Kate Sith, Sid, Vincent, and then Yuffie. And we have, that's a total of like 5 playable characters, right? So I feel like if they do all 5 characters, and then they also have to redo movesets and stuff for the other 4 characters, and now we're talking about a lot of work. And so I'm saying this, and a lot of people are like, I don't know, but I think that they're gonna hold back like maybe 2 or 3 party members.
That's how I feel as well. Like this next part, Red 13 is going to be treated like a new character. Yeah. Completely new. And then you'll probably get like Kate Sith because he was shown in the last game. And then there's going to be one more. And who that one more is kind of up for debate. Yeah, it could well be Zack. I mean, they could make Sephiroth, because he is technically does appear as a temporary character during the flashback sequence, and there is who knows how that's gonna play out. But yeah, I feel the same thing, that because it was also from a promotional perspective, if they like introduce all the characters now, they've got nothing to say next time.
Exactly.
But if they hold them back, like if the last part is like Vincent, Yuffie, and Sid, like that's Vincent is the other character that has incredible levels of popularity. Yeah. And if they hold him back for part 3, that's a huge thing for them, a huge selling point that people will be waiting for. Right.
The flip side of that though too is that there's also going to be that level of fan outrage or disappointment too, because no matter which way they go with that, they're actually gonna cut someone's fave out.
Exactly. It also depends on what they're going to do with parts, right? I mean, Nomura is really keen to do 20 billion parts, even though apparently according to our survey, that's the exact opposite of what people want. And then if it's 4 parts, I feel as though the cuts are a bit easier, and you can control the party members a bit more strictly, because you'll get Yuffie early on, but they could just postpone that quite easily because that was an optional thing. But yeah, this Red 13 comes in, and then you've got Kate Sith as the next one. Vincent and Yuffie and then Sid are much further along if they cut at Junon, for example, or if they cut at Nibelheim. Yeah, and don't have the other party members at that point.
There's also the bit of speculation that like Red 13 and Kate Sith could be like combined into like one moveset, and then they become like one character. I thought that was actually really interesting. Vincent Greymore was talking about that too, about combining Kate Sith
and there is a precedent for that.
Yeah,
there's a precedent for that. Yeah, but as well, I feel as though it's going to be really interesting to see if they don't do that and they do have Kate Sith as the traditional. How on earth are they going to do Kate Sith as a character that's playable? Because it makes literally no sense. Like it's Reeve in another location who's controlling a Moogle who is shouting Reeve's commands through a megaphone to control a robotic Moogle.
In terms of realism, it is kind of
like, how is that? Like whenever like you give a command, is there going to be like a sound that plays or a shout that comes through that you hear to be like, attack? Like how I don't. I can't in my mind figure out how Kate Sith is going to become a thing that is playable in the game, because like in the older games you can suspend like reality, like it doesn't matter how it works,
right?
But as like Hamaguchi was talking about with in like the earlier interviews with the 7 remake, like Aerith's house, it didn't matter if it made no sense in the original game. Who cares? It didn't matter if it made no sense in the original game. With the remake, they were like, well, matter if it made no sense because it's surrounded by body. Where does that water come from? We have to like make all these things to make it so that it actually makes sense because people will nitpick.
Right.
So like with Kate Sith, like people know how it's supposed to work. Right. Because they've talked about it in the Ultimanias, and like in Dirge of Cerberus, they've got like the fake like robots and like the Kate Sith robots and the Moogle robots and all this craziness that no one like. The practicalities of how Kate Sith actually operates is I'm so curious to see how they're going to make that work.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I had messed up the audio there for a second, but you're fine. I had accidentally unmuted the window because I had another window open with the Twitch channel. So I apologize for that, and I apologize for the YouTube audience because there's no way I'm going to be able to edit that out probably. But it got everything you were saying in there.
Okay. No, I was gonna say no one heard my rant about Kate Sith and how it makes no sense.
No, they heard it, but they heard it twice. It was only for like 3 or 4 seconds, so it's not a big deal. There was actually some good questions. So let's start answering some of these questions here. I hear Lauren. I heard it. Hi, Lauren.
Just shouting at me from the
okay. What? Let me see. I'll take this one right here from 04s. Do you think Genova will become the true threat? Hi, Lauren. Do you think that Genova will become the true threat in Final Fantasy VII Remake? As an OG, she and Sephiroth become kind of a mess of who's the real threat. What do you think?
I don't know. It depends on where you go with the theories, right? Because obviously like Steve Peasy's done a lot in his ones where talking about kind of like the motivations of Sephiroth and what they potentially are. And if we're going on that train of thought, then probably not. But it really depends on where they're going to go with the story and which version of Sephiroth is it. Like it's kind of ambiguous in the story, but I mean, even now, and Square Enix have never really spoken on it because I guess they don't want to, but who is in control? Is it Sephiroth in control of Genova, or is it Genova making Sephiroth believe he's in control? You'd like to think that Genova, being the like weird alien that came down and like destroyed civilization, or like wiped out the Cetra and all this stuff, has like, and especially because like Sephiroth has elements of Genova but isn't pure Genova. That Genova has more power over Sephiroth than Sephiroth has over Genova, but then like comes down to the whole thing of like the will of Sephiroth is so strong and he can control and whatever. It's like it does turn into a bit of a mess when as it's gone through, especially with like the On the Way to a Smile and the novels. It does get a bit out there. But I mean, like I feel as though they probably will do more to build Genova out as a character than they did in the original. They're probably going to try and do as much as they can to, and maybe that's why they've done it in the way they have so far, to remove the ambiguity. Because in the obviously in the English translation of the game, in the Japanese translation, it's a bit more clear as to who's what when, but in the English localization, it's ambiguous as to who's Genova. Like, is it Genova? Is it Sephiroth? Like all these things, and like, I feel with the remake, they've tried to make it a bit clearer as to what's going on. But we'll see in that regard. But yeah, I feel as though Genova is going to have a bigger role to play. And whether that's working alongside Sephiroth or not is remains to be seen.
The real Nanaki says, "I will donate if you get Darryl to say, Final Fantasy, what the bloody hell is Final Fantasy?"
What the bloody hell is Final Fantasy?
All right, now we wait for the donation. There was another good question in here. We got room for two more. So actually, one more.
Vincent is not Sephiroth's dad. Come on.
Hey, you know what? Part of me thinks they'll retcon that, and you know the reason why is because that interview where Kitase was sort of like, "Oh, we'll have to keep that in mind for like the Final Fantasy VIII remake."
That whole thing was Edamame channel, wasn't it? Where he was running through all these different theories, and it was like with School is Dead as well, and he was like, "Yeah, if we ever do a remake of Final Fantasy VIII, that's it's an interesting thought, actually." Like, no, Kitase, no, don't do it.
So Cloud OGA asked a question here. I might actually want to tweak it. But the way he worded it here is, do you think that this is a smart exchange by Square fan service versus plot quality? The reason I say I want to take it is because some people actually view this as both. I don't agree that it's both, but I think that quite a number of people would agree that it's fan service and quality. So I guess the way I would ask that question is do you personally view it as the sort of things where potentially characters coming back to life or not dying? Is that a trade-off for you of fan service and plot quality?
I feel it's a trade-off they had to make to achieve what they wanted to achieve. I think, one of the interviews that Kitase did most recently was really telling in terms of, it's logical, the thought process they've gone through, and there's going to be people that don't agree. The people that wanted a straight one-for-one remake, it's a cop-out for them. But ultimately, what's the hook? That they had to think about what's going to be the hook, and the I guess the exchange or the decisions they've made around these decisions have made it so that we're sitting here as fans, all of us, we probably played the original game. We're like, we know what they're going to do. Now we're like, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
So now we're going to be like, all of us, like, especially us, like we are just waiting for the first sign of direction for the next part as a kind of a guide to what they're going to be doing. Because we have literally no clue. And that's why I was saying earlier that when I kind of slept on that ending, I was just thinking that's really smart in some degrees, because now they have something to build on that is unique. It's original, and like, it's gonna antagonize some people, but from the survey, the majority of people, I'm talking like 90%, 95% of people that played the 7 remake are now just really excited about what's going to happen next, because they don't know.
Right.
They don't know. So yeah, like it's a bit fan servicey in some regards. And did they have to have Sephiroth come back in the way he did and have such a prominent part? Probably not. And as fans, I can understand why it's antagonizing, because it kind of annoyed me a bit as well. But then from the flip side was, they didn't do it for us. They did it for all the people that didn't play the original, because as he said in another interview, all these people that didn't play Final Fantasy VII, they still know who Sephiroth is.
Right.
And like when Game FAQs were doing their like most popular, like strongest characters things they always used to do every year, Sephiroth would always be like top 4. Everyone's, it's like, even if you never played Metroid, who Samus is, like Mario, if you never played, like Sephiroth is just up there in that tier of characters who, irrespective of whether you've played that game, who they are.
Right.
And it would be like them doing a remake of well, not quite the same, but a remake of Halo and not having Master Chief in it, or like, I don't know, like Sephiroth had to be there just for that connection with people that had not played the original. Because if they don't know the story and they're going through thinking, well, Sephiroth's supposed to be the main bad guy, where the hell is he?
Yeah. There would be that question.
Yeah, like it was tough for them, and they I feel as though they said they toned it down as well.
Yeah.
No, they didn't want to have him in that much. They toned it up, didn't they? They dialed it up massively.
Right.
And then Hamaguchi made the suggestion about the end boss, and Nomura was like, "Sure, let's go for it." What the hell?
Yeah. Yeah. I think
what could go wrong?
I think the Sephiroth appearances. Oh, and by the way, the real Nanaki ended up following up that donation. So yeah, thank you so much, the real Nanaki. Appreciate you. Yeah. So I think that's where they started to make the crowd who is more conservative about the appearances of Sephiroth. I think that final boss fight with him is kind of where people felt they may have blew the load too soon, so to speak. Especially like, with the way like how do you top that? That was such
like you've just had like an extremely lengthy boss fight, not against just like the Harbinger was long, that could have been decent in itself, but then you go one step further. Well, like what's it going to be in the next game? Like is it Sephiroth, like Ultra Sephiroth? Like who knows?
And when they go back to the edge of creation, and that's actually what I wanted to say earlier too, is that when we talked about the whole sort of fan service versus plot quality thing, I would say that they made a fantastic business decision with the ending, but whether it's a great narrative decision is what remains to be seen.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a good 5 years left, or 6 years left to come to an answer to that question.
Right. So I don't think there's any arguing like whether it was a great business decision. I've been talking about this ending for 7 months now or something weird like that. How long the game's been out? 6-7 months? 7 months. So the fact that we've been talking about it and having these very heated discussions and all that other stuff, I think it's like almost impossible to deny that the ending was a fantastic business decision. It's really going to be like whether it was a great story decision though too.
Yeah, but they have to top it now. That's the challenge to them, isn't it? And it's it's like any developer, like Naughty Dog, when Uncharted came out, it was a really solid game. And then it was like, well, what are you going to do next? You got to top it again and again and again. You have to keep doing better than the last game, otherwise, like people are going to be disappointed. And with the 7 Remake Part 2, we're going to be going into it thinking, is this going to be as good as the first part? Can they do it again? And which is exactly how we felt going into the first part. Like none of us knew what it was actually, if it was actually going to be any good.
Right.
And at the end of it, we were largely pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
Which is a good place to be.
Yeah. The vast majority of people love the game. It's really a question of all these new plot threads and where they're going to go, and if they're going to actually lead us to the no pun intended promised land. Okay, we got time for one last question. Let me scroll through here and see what you guys have been saying. There's a couple.
Lots of comments about Crisis Core. They want to see more Hollander.
Oh man, they want to see Gacked.
I feel Genesis will appear at some point as well. That's my other.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I if they can get Gacked to go through it, there's like that rumor that Gacked and Square Enix don't get along. I tried to research into that. I cannot find anything on it. I don't know where that even came from, to be honest. I guess it depends how they want to do it, right? Because I mean, they've already shown. I know it's slightly different, but they binned off the entire English voice cast. Like they could just come back with a reimagined Genesis. Yeah, that would actually not be too bad. I think that's probably what most people would want out of him if they're going to do him again, would be to take his character and just completely rework it and maybe tone down some of the poetry reading. But I think that would be the best way to produce it. Actually, I want to take someone's comment here and kind of turn it into our last question, because I feel like it's sort of a good question too, while we're still on the 7 remake thread. or I guess this is kind of like where we're closing it out to, but you know what I mean. But it connects into that. So
it'd be good to have another one about 16 as well, because we talked about it a little bit, but not too much.
Actually, yeah. Do you guys got any more Final Fantasy 16 stuff? Okay, this is like a half question here. If you could pick an FF to get remade, which one would it be? That's from Zero Force.
I feel as though I've been through this quite a few times, but I wouldn't be opposed to a remake of 8. I think that would be a good one for them to do, because they could address some of the concerns that people had with the original. Like, everyone pulls out the gameplay as the draw system as being one of the worst things ever made. They could probably do a better solution for that now. But when I was playing through the 7 Remake, the one game that stuck out to me almost immediately was, how cool would it be if they had that like gameplay system and everything with the characters from 10? Like that, I don't know why, but like that was the one where I just felt like if they were going to remake another game, again, going back to the like keeping things consistent, you've got the 7 Remake now, right? Let a portion of that team go off and make the 10 Remake or the 6 Remake. It doesn't matter. Similar style. Just keep it simple. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think 10 would be a good one. I mean, it's slightly biased there because it's probably, I'd say at this point I do deviate, but I think 10's probably my favorite at the moment in the franchise. So I think it would be really nice to bring those characters back with a slightly more dynamic gameplay style.
Right.
So 10 would be my choice at the moment, but who knows what they're going to do if any other remakes. I mean, they'll do another remake at some point, maybe in 10, 15 years' time, with the way things are going. Because they make, as you said, Ryan, they make some good businesses. They make some good business decisions, but then they don't make other good business decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
And business decisions is hard to say, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I there's a lot of talk about different remakes in the chat, but I think I have the perfect question to sort of round out the discussion. What's the one thing that you could see from Final Fantasy XVI? Or what's something big that they could reveal, specifically tailored for you, that would make you super excited?
Specifically tailored for me. I think at this point, the things that I'm most curious about are, it's pretty 3 things. I know you asked me for 1, but I'm going to say 3. Like,
no, give them
I really
all.
want to know about the expanded cast, because, you know, my gut is that out of the 3 characters they've revealed, one of those is important. The other 2 are not so much, and they'll probably be plot devices. The other thing is that I mean, there's the whole thing about the number of icons, and I know that that's probably the thing that people are speculating on about the most, just because of who they could be, what they could be. Nobody knows. So based on the fact that we don't know anything about this game, the icons is the one thing that we do know about, because it's like the classic Final Fantasy thing. So I'm really interested to see which other ones they bring back. You know, Odin and Bahamut seem pretty logical, but it depends on how many icons there are going to be total. And then I want to get some kind of idea about the nature of the story. I think we've got some threads, but it seems as though it's going to be very political in the way it plays out, and the world map that they've shown off is very expansive. I really want to know much more about the world and how the nations feel about each other. And we saw that little scene with the, what do you mean you're not going to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. The nations are big for me.
Yeah, like obviously in that room we now know, because that probably is the Crystalline Dominion having a little chat. There's probably representatives of each of the 4 nations in that room. But like, yeah, just like a bit more about the backstory about the world, and I guess whether or not there is going to be a time shift, which seems logical.
Yeah,
based on what we've seen with Clive being 15 apparently at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, there's no way he's going to be 15 in the version after, because
no.
the new version of him.
I mean, but we looked into it though. There is a precedent for it. The protagonists in Final Fantasy III are like 14 years old, so you never know.
Yeah.
It's possible,
because I would have guessed that like pre-time skip he was like 18 to 20, and then like post he looks like maybe like 28 to 32.
That's
so 15 kind of came out. Yeah, I was like, that's a very, but yeah. And then like, yeah, they kind of like, and then I would be like really surprised if he was only like 20 even like still during the time skip, because he looks like mid to late 30s. Not 30s, again, mid to late 20s. I'm sorry.
Final Fantasy protagonists like Tidus and Yuna are 17. 17 is a pretty popular age for protagonists, but most of them are like under 20.
Right.
I think.
17 works because it's right at that point where adults can relate, but teenagers can't too. That's why it works.
Square Enix always are pretty dubious when it comes to ages, because I mean people always get really shocked when we say that Orin is like mid-30s.
Yeah. Yeah, because he seemed like he would be like 45 or something, right?
Yeah. Like,
yeah. But to answer that on my own end, I think I would say the number one thing is how that world map is actually going to be like when we're actually playing it, and how much of that is actually explorable, and how good the world design and the actual content that populates it. This has been an ongoing issue for me personally, and how I judge Final Fantasy games or JRPGs in general with the past couple of Final Fantasy. I would say starting at like 13 and going straight through to 7R, I've had some complaints with how world design is handled in most of those games, and all of them for different reasons, interestingly enough. But there's been some issues with how they handle the actual level design in those worlds. And so I'm actually curious to see if they will be able to properly handle that level design in 16, which I think the 14 team is best. Yeah. Best.
They make MMOs, so therefore they should be good at making a world that it feels inhabitable and has a lot of personality. And my hope, looking at that world map, you can see like the cities are quite clear, but there's also lots of tiny little settlements dotted around.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about.
That they are actually places you can go to, and kind of, because Final Fantasy 15 teased the idea of that and then didn't realize it.
Right. And then also teased the idea of there being like these 4 major nations. And then
they were all like miraculously like they weren't around when the game took place.
Yeah. And so like 90% of the game you don't actually spend it in those areas. So I think for me the biggest thing 16 has to do, aside from all the essential stuff, telling a good narrative, how combat good, I really am curious if they can actually get like the actual world design right this time. And then the second thing, which is totally, it's not crucial, but man, can we get some waifus in the can we please get some like some good waifus in 16? I think that's and those are my only 2 things. Some really good waifus and a great map. Okay, I think that's gonna round out the stream today. But before we go, Darryl, I'd like for you to tell everyone about where they can find Final Fantasy Union on Twitch, because I'm sure many of you are already following you guys on YouTube. If not, there'll be a link in the description below when this is uploaded. But I don't think a lot of people know that you and Lauren have been doing stuff on Twitch. So if you could tell everyone about that.
Sure. So I think I mentioned right at the beginning of the stream when things are coming in, but we go by the name Lozzadar on Twitch, which is LOZZADAR. This is Lauren. Hey, Lauren.
Hey, Lauren.
So this is Dar, and that's Lozza. And we chose a completely random name that's not related to anything we do. because we didn't want to be restricted to just playing Final Fantasy games, even though that is what we seem to play the majority of the time anyway. But yeah, like if anyone wants to throw us a follow, then it would be much appreciated. At the moment, we are playing through Final Fantasy III. Great game that no one really plays that much, just because it's one of the ones that didn't get localized until much later. And then, so we've done Final Fantasy 1 and 2 so far. We're rotating as well. So I played through 1 and I'm doing 3. Lauren did 4. It's 2, and she's going to do 4 as well when we get on to 4. We did Crystal Chronicles not too long ago, which was a challenge because of the way they implemented that game. But yeah, we've played some other stuff as well. We've done a bit of Hades. Lauren did a Halloween stream, Until Dawn, which was fun. And I think the plan moving forward as well is to try and do some other games too. Like I've never really played, even though I'm so ingrained with Final Fantasy, I'm not that in touch with the like wider RPG scene. I've played a couple of action RPGs, but like the big JRPGs, I've not really touched that much. So I've never really played a Tales game. I've not really played. I played one Disgaea game.
You need to play Persona 5 Royal.
No, I played a Persona game.
Play Persona.
I've only played the original Pokemon.
Oh wow!
Like, I'm pretty noobish when it comes to JRPGs.
Yeah, you played Nier Automata, I'm sure. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so my
that's the other fun story.
Yeah,
we were talking about that at the beginning, right? Where Nier is just this massive, crazy thing now, and it's just so weird to see what it's become because so some people may know, but I used to be a games journalist, so I went to a couple of E3s, Gamescoms, TGSs, and I got to see Nier when it was kind of pre-build. Like it was probably the weirdest demonstration of a game I have ever seen, and I've seen hundreds, because it wasn't even really the game. They like the town that Nier is in, that he lives in. It was that, but there was no town. It was just fields, and they had Nier running around these fields, just jumping up and down. And then they showed a little bit of the first area where you fight the first boss, and you get to see the shades. And my first question was like, so is Nomura involved with this? Kind of looks like a Heartless.
They do kind of look like Heartless. I'm not gonna lie, they do. And
so there was nothing to go on. And I came out of that meeting. I think does anyone remember that Joystick, the publication? I think they were in the same session as me, and they posted up their preview, and it was just the guy's notepad with just the title Nier and just blank underneath. Because it was just like nobody knew what they had just seen at all, and because it was being made by Caviar, expectations were pretty low. So yeah, when I actually played the game, I no expectations whatsoever for it, and by the end of it, I was just like, this is I think one of the weirdest games I've ever played in my life, because the soundtrack was amazing. At that point, it's definitely one of the best soundtracks for a long time in a Japanese game, if not like gaming in general. The story was so impactful, but then it was let down by like the kind of ropey graphics, and the normal gameplay was okay, but then it had Yoko Taro's experimental gameplay. It's like, we're going to go into a black and white third fixed camera Resident Evil style influenced area now. Oh no, now we're going to go into a text adventure. Okay.
Yeah, Yoko Taro is big on variety. That's
I was like, after that game came out, I was like spouting so much about how great it was, and people just needed to give it a chance. And some people just didn't get on with it, but I managed to get Lauren on it. She now absolutely loves it. It's one of her favorite games of all time. And so many other people in our community were able to get into it. But some people just couldn't. But it's one of those games where you have to give it a chance. Like if you just play it for an hour, it's not really going to stick on you. But like the whole like second ending B, I'd never really experienced anything like that in gaming before. Like it felt so original because I hadn't played any of the Drakengard games, so it just felt really fresh, and it opened my eyes up because you go through that first playthrough and you're like, yeah, this is all making sense, and then you go through the second playthrough and you're like, I'm a horrible person. I'm like the worst person ever.
Yeah, that's Yoko Taro games. Yeah.
And then Nier Automata, it was a different experience, and I know some people that played Nier that just couldn't get into it because of like the nature of the game. It's how it's like, it's robots, and they're not robots, are they? They're androids.
Yeah, well, both technically.
And
because the machines are robots.
Obviously I'm so happy it's done so well, and I'm so happy that they've been able to use that to do a remake of the first one, because I always looked at that first game and thought, if they hadn't shipped this out to a passable developer at best, like Caviar's track record was like not great. Right. Bullet Witch was a mess. Like it just like if they'd have given this to like Platinum Games that was always the developer I thought of. If they'd have given this to Platinum Games in the first place, Nier would have been like sensational, because in my opinion, the story and the soundtrack are better than Automata. It just doesn't have the same quality in other areas.
Yeah,
so
that's what I hear a lot.
I'm really hopeful that the Nier remaster is going to enable people that have come in with Automata to experience the first game, because you can't even find it anywhere now.
Yeah,
the original game is such a rarity. It's not available anywhere other than used game stores, essentially.
Yeah. And hopefully this new version is just going to outright replace the old version. Yeah. So,
and in typical Yoko Taro style, it's not a remake, it's not a remaster, it's an updated version or whatever it is. It's he's calling it.
I feel like he like consulted Nomura on that. He was like, what should I do with this? And like Nomura just like wrote like a whole bunch of like random numbers out, and he was like, yeah, that's a great idea. All right, Darryl, thank you so much for coming on here. I greatly appreciated your time. I think I was only supposed to be on. I think we were supposed to do this for like an hour, and we went like way. Well, we didn't go too over. Yeah, the technical issues.
So the technical issues at the beginning. Basically, what I know what happened when my daughter came home from school. We have our router in a pretty precarious position. It's near our front door because that's where the telephone connection is. And she's only 5. Well, not almost 5. She's almost 5. She just came in and she just like put her bag on it and just pushed the router over. All the cables fell out, and then it was kind of okay, but yeah, apparently it wasn't okay enough.
That makes so much sense.
All good now. Awesome. Well, I'm glad we got everything straightened out. Okay. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the discussion. Hopefully I didn't offend too many people.
Nothing offensive was said.
I said the videos we're generally quite we are very open-minded to everyone's opinions and don't try and ram our own opinions down anyone's throat. But when it comes to podcasts, straight in there. I'm a bit less diplomatic, but I tried to be inclusive. Awesome.
All right, but before we go, we need to rate somebody. I already know who we're gonna rate. We're gonna rate my friend here. He's playing Persona 3, which needs a remaster. Holy shit! I don't think anyone disagrees on that one. Okay, we're going into the raid. This video will be up on YouTube on like sometime Monday, Tuesday. All right, love you guys.
Catch you later, guys.